Some nights the sea doesn't just move, it broods. Imagine standing on a silent shore as the surf arrives the colour of old wine. Fish float belly up like confetti at the wrong parade, and the air tastes metallic, like a battery on your tongue. Tonight we're rolling the planet back millions of years, to the nights when microscopic tyrants painted oceans red and turned food webs inside out. Before we dive in, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location. I want to see which coasts and continents are brave enough to stare into this water with me. You smell it before you see it. A strange sweetness with rotten edges, like fruit left in a hot car, braided with a sour battery tongue metal that makes your jaw tighten. The breeze carries it in, casual as gossip. Then your eyes adjust, and there it is, the shoreline stained a bruised rust, like someone poured 1,000 barrels of old wine into the sea and stirred. Waves fold over themselves and leave streaks of reddish-brown foam that looks almost domestic, like cappuccino froth, if cappuccinos could kill you. Stand there for a moment, listen. The beach is quieter than it should be. Gulls hang back, suspicious, as if they've learned the hard way that free lunch sometimes comes with a neurological plot twist. A lone crab scuttles sideways through the foam, stops, and lifts its claws in the universal posture of "I don't like this either." Every so often a fish turns in the shallows, not darting, rolling slow, as if someone turned gravity sideways underwater. You want to say it's dramatic, but that implies intention. There is no plan, only chemistry. On the surface, the villains are invisible in the singular and monstrous in the collective. Dinoflagellates, tiny armoured drifters with 2 whiptails for half-hearted swimming and a backpack full of pigments. Individually they're just glittery specks under a microscope, all business and cellulose plates. Together they write in colour. Their pigments, carotenoids like peridinin, lend the water this dark tea-to-blood palette, although the precise shade depends on who's throwing the party. Sometimes it's more brown, sometimes brick red, sometimes a red that only appears when sunlight crosses the waves at a certain angle, and you wish you had a better word than red. We call it a red tide because complicated spectral scattering event caused by planktonic overgrowth never really caught on. Breathe shallow. That tickle in your throat, it's not your imagination. When these blooms fire up, some species manufacture toxins so potent they make industrial chemistry look shy. Others don't bother with poisons. They're just so numerous that when daylight fades and the bloom begins its nightly respiration binge, oxygen dips and everything with gills feels like it's inhaling through a pinhole. Still others bloom, die and sink, and the cleanup crew, bacteria with metabolisms older than bones, devours the rain of dead cells, finishing the job by drinking the oxygen down to nothing. Your beach vacation becomes a demonstration of microbial capitalism. Externalize costs, privatize gains, suffocate the commons, watch the water again. You can see the bloom gathering in streaks called windrows where currents and breezes herd the cells into visible veins, the ocean's circulatory system clogged with traffic. Punch the water with your hand after dark and some species flash an indignant blue. Bioluminescent chastisement, a burglar alarm that doubles as a magic trick. It's gorgeous. It's also the aquatic equivalent of a house that glows while the foundations rot. Beauty is not obligated to be kind. Here's the part that makes your neck prickle. This is not a modern novelty. The same choreography played on ancient stages long before gulls, long before beaches with snack bars, sometimes on scales we politely refer to as geologically significant. When the climate warmed, when rainstorms sharpened and rivers fed the coast with fat loads of phosphorus and iron, when the ocean's surface warmed enough to sit in stratified layers like an unshaken bottle of salad dressing, the tiny monarchs took the throne. Blooms exploded. Oxygen dropped. In the shallows, sunlight still penetrated, but the water below turned into the colourless memory of oxygen, anoxia, and then fell farther into the sulphur dream of euxinia. That's the fancy word for when hydrogen sulfide joins the party. You know the smell already. Rotten eggs with a mean streak. It is not subtle. Euxinia flavours the water with chemistry that would make a refinery blush. Purple and green sulphur bacteria feast there, living off light and poison, painting the photic zone in bruised greens and funeral purples. In the rock record they leave signatures, pigments that fossilised into molecules with tongue-twisting names, whispering, "We thrived when the water went bad." Later, geologists will split shale with a hammer and sniff a faint ghost of the old breath, the way librarians might smell a book to guess its century and nod. Yes, the ocean had a night like this, maybe many. Back at our shoreline, the evidence comes in waves. Fish kills stack along the tide line, each body a small confession. Shellfish, diligent little filters, gorge on the bloom and quietly load themselves with toxins until they become edible batteries. Perfectly delicious, perfectly dangerous. Top predators with systems designed for speed and grace suddenly wobble. Sea turtles surface and linger too long. Dolphins ghost the perimeter like bouncers who've seen this club burn before. Even the air gets in on it. Sea spray can carry aerosolized toxins that make throats raw and lungs tight. You cough, wipe your eyes, and pretend the wind just changed. It did. It changed into chemistry. If you were a prehistoric witness, and I'm sorry, but you're not getting out of this thought experiment, you'd have seen different cast members, same plot. Maybe the shoreline wasn't crowded with gulls, but with pterosaur shadows wheeling overhead, keeping their distance with the universal wisdom of that smell is not food. In reefs, when there were reefs, the tidy architectures built by little stonemasons faltered as the water column flipped from sparkling and oxygen-rich to stagnant and low on breath. Jellyfish, bless their indifferent little bells, adapted with the enthusiasm of landlords in a housing shortage. They thrive where others stutter. The food web didn't disappear, it reconfigured into a blunt instrument. The bloom itself is not malicious, it's opportunistic. Warmth, stillness, nutrients, that's the recipe. It cares less about your plans and more about the physics of light and the algebra of nitrogen. The sarcasm writes itself. We call it a harmful algal bloom, but the harm is in the mismatch between the way life scales and the way ecosystems breathe. At small scales, a dinoflagellate doubling feels like a success story. Multiply that across days and kilometers, and you get the kind of success that looks from the shore like liquid rust and dying fish. Capital N Nature isn't a villain. She's an accountant, and the ledger balances with or without our approval. Kneel and scoop a handful of water. Hold it against the light. It's not uniformly red, it's cloudy, full of serpended life, glittering particles that bump your skin like invisible hail. Some cells are armoured with cellulose plates that fit together like a microscopic medieval suit. Others are bare, gelatinous. They drift, spin, and in their thousands per milliliter, write a collective sentence the length of a coastline. If you could shrink and go diving among them, it would look like a slow-motion dust storm, each grain alive, each motion multiplied by billions, until the water itself becomes a character with motives. Now imagine a time-lapse, day, night, day. Sunlight fuels, nightfall hums, oxygen gently claws its way back with morning winds, then droops again as the bloom thickens. Death is not an event but a curve. Down below, bacteria clock in for the graveyard shift and keep working through the day, taking payment in oxygen until the account reads 0. Then other bacteria arrive, the ones that breathe sulfate and exhale sulfide, and the chemistry drops into the underworld. The seafloor, usually animated by worms and burrowing things that stir the sediment like chefs fluffing risotto, goes quiet. Layers settle in laminae so crisp you could count the bad nights after the fact, one line at a time, like tree rings laid flat. You can tell yourself it's temporary because it is. Blooms wane. Winds return, storms mix the water like a spoon. Predators find their stomachs again and patrol the margins. Shellfish depurate. The air goes back to smelling like salt and sunscreen. But the ocean remembers in sediments. Keeps a diary nobody reads until someone with a hammer and a lab decides to page through, pointing to the black shale and saying, right there. That's when the colour came. That's when breathing became optional. And you on this ordinary shoreline with extraordinary water, you're part of the record too. The cough, the narrowed eyes, the way you step back from the foam as if it might reach for you. Those are small human annotations on a very old script. The truth is both comforting and chilling. This has happened before on nights without names, under stars no one was cataloguing. The sea has turned to blood and back again, more times than we have words for. That smell you caught at the start, the sweet rot, the metallic sting, is history flagging you down, wagging a finger, reminding you that the ocean doesn't need monsters to make a horror scene. It can do it with sunlight, a teaspoon of nutrients, and a trillion obedient cells humming multiply, multiply, multiply. They run the water column like a cartel you can only see under a microscope. A billion tiny bosses with whips for tails and armour, like a medieval wardrobe malfunction. Dinoflagellates, yes, the name sounds like a kid's band. No, they are not cute. Spin through the shallows with two flagella. One wrapped around the waist like a belt that makes them corkscrew, the other trailing like a rudder that says this way to trouble. Some wear cellulose plates, thicker, fitted together so neatly a watchmaker would blush. Others go naked and slippery, built for sprinting and ambush. And they were not alone. Cyanobacteria, diatoms, rhaphodophytes, haptophytes, an alphabet soup of single-celled opportunists, hover nearby like cousins who just happened to be in the neighbourhood when the pantry got stocked. The politics of the regime are simple. Step 1, wait. They lurk as cysts in the sediment, resting stages, seed banks, micro-time capsules. A storm stirs the bottom, a warm spell settles the surface, the river brings a buffet of phosphates and nitrates, and the bank pays out. Up they rise hatch by hatch, the way a rumour leaks from a quiet room, slow, then everywhere. Step 2, take the light. In daylight they climb toward the surface where photons are thick as gold dust. Step 3, take the nutrients. After dark, the same cells descend, using those whiptails like oars to dip into deeper, richer water and tank up. It's called dial vertical migration. But let's not flatter them with technical poetry. They are climbing the corporate ladder of the sea, clocking in for photosynthesis, clocking out to raid the pantry below. Some carry tiny eye spots to track the sun. Most don't need them. Gravity and shear tell them enough. The belt flagellum spins, the rudder flagellum nudges, the cell leans towards convenience like a commuter drifting into the fastest lane. They gather along invisible fronts and slicks, places where currents converge, and there they thicken into patches, stripes, braided ribbons, the wind herds into long veined windrows. From the beach you can read those veins like policy memos. Stratify the water, deliver nutrients, profit. Their personalities are eclectic. Plenty of species are mild, content to sunbathe and snack on dissolved nutrients, happy little chlorophyll balloons. Others have hobbies. Mixotrophs write the regime's Black Ops manual. Half plant, half predator. They photosynthesize by day and hunt by night. They'll lasso a smaller cell with a feeding tube, peduncle, or fling out a gelatinous feeding veil, pallium, and digest their prey outside their bodies like a portable stomach. Some keep trophies, the chloroplasts of their victims, stolen and repurposed, a practice charmingly called kleptoplasty. It's the single-celled version of, I like your car, it's mine now. Weapons? They brought plenty. There are toxin suites that would make a pharmacologist sit down. Saxitoxins that turn sodium channels into locked doors. Nerve impulses knock. No one answers. Brevetoxins that jam those channels open. Everything fears until it fails. Ciguatoxins that move up a reef's food chain like a rumour with legs, all the way to the top predator that didn't ask to be a vector. Other families, from cousins outside the dinoflagellate clan, bring their own. Ocadaic acid, hello diuretic shellfish poisoning, azaspiricids, primnosins from golden algae, and domoic acid from the wrong diatoms at the wrong time, a memory eraser masquerading as a seafood garnish. You can taste none of it. You can suffer all of it. Even their beauty is a public relations trap. Some of the night shift species flare with bioluminescence, a clean, cold blue that ignites when waves shear their membranes and trigger little sacs called scintillans to run the luciferin luciferase trick. The flash is a burglar alarm meant to spotlight predators, a kind of catch-me-and-glow strategy. To us, it's mesmerising. To anchovies gasping below, it's a firework show thrown by the landlord who just turned off the oxygen. The regime has allies. Cyanobacteria, older than bones, older than your great-great-grandmother's rocks, write the prequel to all of this. They stitched the planet's first oxygen by the slow miracle of photosynthesis, then stuck around to prove that founders can also be disruptors. Some form surface scums that wrinkle in the breeze like poisoned silk, packaging microcystins and anatoxins with a grim efficiency. Out in the open ocean, Trichodesmium floats in rust-coloured puff sailors once called sea sawdust, grabbing nitrogen from thin air with a swagger that says rules are for eukaryotes. The regime is smart without being conscious. When the sea stratifies, warm water perched over cold like oil on vinegar, mixing weakens, and the tiny rulers become landlords of the sunny penthouse. They divide by simple fission. 2 for 1, we love a deal, but stress can nudge them into sex, swapping genetic toolkits, then shelving themselves as durable cysts again, tiny armoured seeds waiting for the next season, the next storm, the next human city that forgets rivers are not soup sewers. Their patience makes our urgency look quaint. They also moonlight as civil engineers. Inside coral tissues, relatives from the Symbiodinaceae clan live as endosymbionts, zooxanthellae, if you enjoy words that sound like spells, powering reefs with sugar in exchange for a home. When heat waves hit, the partnership sours, corals evict the tenants, and whole neighbourhoods go ghostly white. Same family, different moods. One lineage builds airy cities of calcium and light. Another paints coastlines the colour of a bruise. You tell me whether that's irony or just range, but back to power. Consider their logistics. A single litre of bloom water can hold hundreds of thousands of cells. Multiply by a bay, then by a shelf sea, then by a warm summer with polite winds and well-timed rain, and you get an empire. Patchy at first, then hazy, then a canopy. Sunlight penetrates, sure, but the balance shifts, like adding one more guest to a table that can't quite fit them all, and suddenly no one can reach the bread. The cells at the top gorge, the cells below starve for photons, the dead fall like red snow. Bacteria clock in to break the bodies down and the oxygen tab comes due. If a breeze picks up and the water mixes, the sea wins a reprieve. If not, the water column slides toward the unbreathable. Predators exist. Tiny grazers, copepods, microflagellates, the usual suspects mow the water. But the regime has answers. Some species taste foul, others slip through filters, still others are so good at dividing that death is just a suggestion. Even when grazers bloom in reply, the system sways rather than falls. The rulers don't need to be immortal, they just need to be faster. Their propaganda is subtle. We call it productivity. Satellite images render them as marbled clouds on the sea. Emerald and crimson swirls a painter might envy. Infographics label them blooms, as if they were wildflowers on a meadow rather than chemistry's answer to hubris. In truth, they are the sea's shortest revolution. They rise when the physics allow and the nutrients invite. They choke and glitter and glow. They fall when the pantry empties or the wind remembers how to stir the pot. The throne is temporary, the strategy old, the casualties predictable. Some species are saints, many are citizens, a few are tyrants, but none are malicious in the way we tell stories about malice. They are exquisitely tuned success machines. Give them warmth, they multiply. Give them phosphor, they multiply faster. Give them stillness, and they stack into red silk you can see from a cliff. Take any one of those supports away, and they retreat to the seed bank in the mud, a parliament dissolved until the next session. If you could shrink yourself and drift among them, you'd hear no anthem, only the soft percussion of flagella against water and the whispering physics of buoyancy and drag. You'd watch a mixotroph reel in a diatom with the matter-of-fact patience of a person sipping soup. You'd see a thecate dinoflagellate flex its plates like a concertina as it divides. You'd pass a chain of diatoms bristling with spines, neighbours at this party that didn't even bring the same toxins but might still cause trouble if they bloom under the wrong sky. You would ride a nightly elevator with a million strangers and feel the temperature bump as you cross the thermocline, hot above, cold below, like slipping through a veil. And if you pulled back out of that water, return to the ordinary size where your lungs have opinions and your eyes see colour, you would understand the monarchy for what it is. A constitutional order written in light, nutrients and time. The constitution is short. Article 1. When conditions are favourable, ascend. Article 2. Convert opportunity into numbers. Article 3. If challenged, diversify. Eat, still, glow, armour up, lie low as assist. Article 4. Repeat when summoned by season, storm or mistake. The articles have stood for hundreds of millions of years. They do not mention you, they do not have to. Start with a still ocean and the kind of heat that makes mirages out of parking lots. Warm water slides over cold and says, "I live here now," and the sea agrees. No handshake, just physics, density rules, and warm is lighter than cold. A lid settles over the water column so cleanly you could draw the boundary with a ruler. The thermocline, like a chalk line in a crime scene. Above it, sunlight, stillness and comfort. Below it, a patient dark that remembers how to breathe if only the ceiling would let fresh air in. You've basically taken a vast, well-ventilated lung and wrapped it in plastic. Then you cater the party. From the sky, iron-rich dust blown off dry continents, a seasoning of micronutrients that turns maybe into now. From the land, rivers fat with fertilizers and soils, the phosphorus and nitrogen winnings of 1,000 farms and 100 cities. From the deep, volcanic burps and ashfall, confetti of glass and minerals that dissolve into the shallows like effervescent tablets. Even rock itself contributes, weathered down to chemistry by rain and time. The ocean does not say no. It never does. It says, ah. Resources. With the lid on and the pantry open, the surface blooms. Fluorescence isn't a metaphor. You can see it from space as swirls of pigment. The planet trying on a coat of emeralds and rust. Phytoplankton multiply like ideas in a group chat, and every cell has the same plan. Take the carbon, take the light, take the nutrients, make more of me. While the sun is up, the water fizzes with photosynthesis. When it sets, the bills arrive. Respiration hums through everything alive and oxygen drops a small ominous step. Do that for nights stacked on nights and the drop stops being small. The biology is not subtle about physics. Warmer water holds less gas, oxygen included, because molecules jostle and shrug off the dissolved stuff. That means your pretty heatwave pre-discounted the oxygen before anyone even started using it. Add the lid that blocks wind-driven mixing, the ocean's house fan, and you've designed a system that can only run on stored air. It's like stuffing 100 strangers into an elevator and pausing between floors. They'll be fine for a minute. Give it hours. Then comes gravity's snow. Cells die, or get grazed and turned into pellets, or just decide it's time to settle. They drift down as marine snow, flocculent clumps, threads of mucus, half-eaten diatoms, all the confetti of a good party at last call. In the dim layer below the chalk line, bacteria clock in like night janitors with very hungry lungs. They burn the rain of falling carbon, and in the process, they burn oxygen. If mixing can't resupply it, the gauge slides from healthy to hypoxic, then through the floor into anoxic. No oxygen, none. The redox ladder comes out, rickety but proven. If you can't breathe O2, use something else. First nitrate, then manganese oxides, then iron oxides, then sulfate. An electron scavenger's to-do list descending into older, smellier metabolisms. Here's your chemistry set from hell, neatly arranged on a bathyscaphe grey shelf. When oxygen runs out, microbes that breathe nitrate get busy, converting it to nitrogen gas, denitrification, puffing fertilizer straight back to the sky. A cousin, Animox, takes nitrite and ammonium, and also makes N2 because even bacteria have a nihilist phase. The result, the surface loses nitrogen, the deep loses oxygen, the debt grows. If the party keeps going, manganese and iron oxides get reduced next, turning the water tea-coloured and bleeding dissolved metals out of the mud. Sediments that were tidy iron phosphate warehouses unlock, phosphate pours out like a jailbreak. That is not a side note, it's the feedback loop from your nightmares. Phosphate feeds the bloom above, the bloom dies, the rain falls, the oxygen falls, the mud releases more phosphate, repeat until the cliff, and then sulfate reduction lights the final candle. Sulfate is seawater's great reserve, plentiful, patient, eager to accept electrons when everything nicer has been spent. Sulfate reducers eat carbon and exhale hydrogen sulfide, H2S, which wears that rotten egg cologne that moves you upwind without asking your permission. Hydrogen sulfide is not only rude, it's lethal. It binds to the machinery of respiration, shuts down cytochrome oxidase like a bouncer telling your mitochondria to go home. Touch enough of it to sunlight in the upper water, and phototrophic sulfur bacteria arrive, greens and purples, eating light and sulfide, staining the shallows in bruised colours. Sometimes H2S oxidizes to elemental sulfur right in the water column, and you get ghostly milky plumes, yellowish veils that look harmless until you remember what they mean. Call this state euxinia, a word that sounds like a luxury perfume and behaves like a basement leak of poison gas. In euxinic layers, iron meets sulfide and precipitates as iron sulfides, black minerals that darken sediments into shiny laminated shales. No worms churn these layers, no clams breathe softly beneath them. Each lamina settles like a year pressed flat, a stack of nights when the sea forgot how to inhale. If someone splits those rocks 100 million years later, they may sniff faintly, yes, geologists actually do this, and catch the ghost of sulfur and old breath. In the same rocks, the pigments of those sulfur bacteria can fossilize into molecules with names like isoreniaratene, molecular graffiti that says, the photic zone went bad here. Back upstairs, the air isn't innocent. Sea spray slings micro droplets off breaking waves, aerosolizing tiny bits of whatever the bloom is cooking. Salts, organic acids, even toxins from certain dinoflagellates. Breathe deep on the wrong day and your throat narrates the chemistry with a cough. Meanwhile, the carbon dioxide released by all that deep respiration pushes acidity higher. More CO2 dissolves to carbonic acid, more protons roam free, and the saturation state of carbonate minerals drops. If you're a creature trying to lay aragonite or calcite, Coral, pteropod, baby clam, you just got a memo. The ocean would like you to do that slower, please. If the interior of the water column slips toward acid and the bottom goes anoxic, dissolution can start eating from below. Reefs do not love that. Neither do shells. The lid doesn't just come from temperature. Fresh water does it too. A flood spills a low salinity lens onto the coast. The lens floats over heavier salt water. Halocline meets thermocline, merges into a thicnocline, density's brick wall, tough for wind to punch through. Now add a quiet week, an obedient sun, and a river coughing nutrients it found after the storm chewed up fields and streets. The lens warms fast, the bloom answers faster. You can watch the oxygen meter in the bottom water trace a graceful, merciless curve downward, a handwriting of suffocation. If the wind returns with muscle, it can break the spell. Storms are the ocean's stand mixers. They whip oxygen back in, erase the chalk line, fling nutrients out of the surface layer like a snow globe. But storms also mobilize mud, and mud stores memory. Disturb an anoxic bottom, and you may shake loose bouts of sulfide and phosphate, momentary burps that spike the same chemistry you were trying to end. That's the nasty elegance of this system. It wants reinforcement. Oxygen begets oxygen because healthy bottoms trap phosphorus and let worms till the soil. Anoxia begets anoxia because dead bottoms leak phosphorus and abolish the tillers. Tip it just far enough and you aren't solving a problem, you're breaking a habit. Somewhere a textbook whispers Redfield ratio like a spell. 106 carbon, 16 nitrogen, 1 phosphorus, the average recipe for marine life. It's a useful lie. Real seas wiggle. If you hand the surface layer a bag of phosphorus with not enough nitrogen, nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria turn up wearing leather jackets, pulling N2 out of the air and making their own fertilizer. If you overload nitrogen with too little phosphorus, the party pauses until the mud or a river says, "Fine, fine, take this." If iron is missing, half the nitrogen fixers sulk because their enzymes need it like you need coffee. So deserts that send dust across oceans are not ambience. They're iron couriers, flipping entire basins from nap to feast. Watch how fast the gears mesh. The sun warms the lid throttles mixing, runoff or ash delivers nutrients, the bloom starts, cells die and sink, bacteria respire, oxygen falls. Denitrification and anemox strip fix nitrogen. Phosphorus leaks from sediments. Nitrogen limitation invites nitrogen fixers that like warmth and stillness. Their success fuels yet more biomass, which sinks and steals yet more oxygen. Sulfate reduction fires up. Hydrogen sulfide climbs the ladder. If the H2S reaches into light, the purple and green sulfur bacteria lay their translucent carpets. If it reaches the air, larger animals cough and flee. If it reaches too far, they don't. You don't need an entire ocean to fail for this to feel biblical. A bay is enough, a fjord, a shelf sea, but yes, entire oceans have flirted with this chemistry. In the rock record, there are chapters we call oceanic anoxic events, times when black shales accumulated on a scale that makes modern dead zones look like postcards. Permian Triassic, Toarcian, a few mid-Cretaceous intervals, each with its own prequel of greenhouse warmth. Altered hydrologic cycles, nutrient bonanzas, and, often, volcanism big enough to have a name you capitalize. Traps, provinces. Those eruptions didn't just pour CO2 into the sky. They sprinkled ash like multivitamins and tweaked climate for long, rude stretches. The ocean answered in chemistry, not sentiment. Even the way the interface flickers is its own drama. At the chemocline, the razor boundary between sulfide-rich and oxygen-rich water, oxidation reaction to fire constantly. H2S meets O2 and turns to sulfate. or pauses as elemental sulfur, releasing acid and heat at scales you can't feel but microbes can. The interface migrates with wind, with tides, with cloud cover. Put a sensor there and it sings a jittery song of millimeters. Put a fish there and it gets a very short lesson in boundary conditions. We add our fingerprints with a certain naive flair. We fertilize fields that leak. We straighten rivers that sprint their loads to the coast. We warm the air that warms the lid that silences the mixing. We build hard edges along estuaries that used to breathe through marshes. Then we stand on docks and notice the smell and say the word unprecedented, because we weren't there for the last go-round. The ocean rolls an old reel and plays it anyway. And here's the kicker you can't taste. This is all satisfyingly lawful. Nothing supernatural, no mythic beasts, no curses, just the periodic table with a dramatic streak. Carbon falls and is eaten, oxygen is consumed, alternate electron acceptors take the stage when oxygen leaves, redox potentials step down like a staircase into the dark, minerals dissolve when their guardians lose electrons, nutrients recycle in ways that prefer the bloom to the breath. You could write the differential equations out on a napkin if the wind wasn't trying to steal it. The horror isn't randomness, it's inevitability once the parameters slide. So you watch the surface glitter in late light, a billion cells tanning under photons, and you imagine the staircase below, each step a different smell, a different colour, a different metabolism waiting its turn. The sea looks calm. The chemistry is sprinting. Somewhere in that sprint, a gas with a sense of humour is forming, a mineral with a taste for black is settling, and a feedback loop is smiling, patient as silt. All it asks is that you keep the lid on and the pantry full, can take care of the rest. The killers in this story don't roar, they don't even have faces. They're molecules no bigger than a shrug, slipping across membranes, picking locks that evolution thought were secure. You can't see them, can't smell them, can't cook them out, and they don't need a plan because chemistry is a plan that never sleeps. We give them tidy names: saxitoxin, brevitoxin, siguatoxin, domoic acid, like labels on polite poison, but what they really are is leverage. Tiny wedges that turn the protein machinery in nerves and muscles a fraction of a millimetre, and then the whole animal stops working right. Start with the private security guards of your nervous system, voltage-gated sodium channels. They're the bouncers on the club door, letting ions in precisely when the beat drops so your neurons can fire and your muscles can move. Saxitoxin walks up in a suit that fits a little too perfectly and slips into the exact pocket on the channel where sodium is supposed to pass. Door locked, neuron knocks, no answer. Paralysis follows in a strict top-down etiquette. Lips tingle, fingers go numb, legs get heavy, breathing forgets itself. The dose, measured in micrograms, as in crumbs of a crumb. It's the kind of potency that makes weapon designers take notes and chefs develop a sudden appreciation for lab reports. Brevitoxin, made famous by Florida's Carenia brevis, has the opposite sense of humour. Instead of locking the door, it props it open. Sodium floods in like fans after a broken turnstile. Neurons fire and fire and fire until they fail, and the result is a sodium-saturated static that the body experiences as burning eyes, coughing lungs, tingling skin, disorientation. Sea breeze looks innocent. Aerosolized brevitoxin turns it into a portable irritant you can inhale on a boardwalk. Fish, whose gills are essentially chandeliered membranes optimized for thinness, get the worst of it. Channels stuck, nervous systems jammed, respiratory surfaces inflamed. You see it as slicks of silver bellies along a tide line, a confetti parade nobody ordered. On reefs, another quiet empire operates. Ciguatoxins, the reef rumour that grows legs. These are cooked up by benthic dinoflagellates like Gambia discus and Fukuyoa, a dusting over seagrass and coral rubble. Small herbivorous fish nibble the turf. Bigger fish eat the small ones. Top predators take a final satisfied bite, and the molecule rides up the food chain like a VIP with a stack of wristbands. To humans, the symptoms are a spectacular prank: numbness, nausea, pain in the joints that feels like glass in the gears, and for many, temperature reversal. Ice feels scalding, and a warm shower stings like sleet. People swear the sensation is demonic. It's not. It's a sodium channel with its voltage sensor tweaked, misreporting the world to your brain. Also, it can last weeks, months. You do not cook Sigua toxin out. You do not freeze it out. You simply become a careful listener to your own biology's bad news. Then the memory thief, domoic acid. Not a dinoflagellate's creation this time, but a diatom's pseudo-Nitschia, proving that trouble in the phyto world is an equal opportunity employer. Domoic acid is a mimic, a counterfeit key for glutamate receptors, kainate and AMPA on neurons in the hippocampus, a brain region that's in charge of let's remember the important bits. Flood enough of those receptors and you light the circuit like a Christmas tree. Overexcitation becomes cell death, which becomes loss. Victims twitch, seize, forget. Sea lions haul out on California beaches, eyes glassy, heads bobbing, in a rhythm that says storm inside. Some never return to hunting like themselves again. It's called amnesic shellfish poisoning when it enters humans because occasionally the clinical naming committee tells the truth. You want more? The toxin cabinet is crowded. Okadaic acid, courtesy of some dinoflagellates in the shelf's messier seasons, doesn't target nerves. It goes after your cell's restraint system, inhibiting protein phosphatases, PP1 and PP2A. With the brakes off, your intestinal cells mismanage ion transport, water surges the wrong direction, and your day becomes a diary you don't want to reread. Primicins from golden algae punch holes in gills and red blood cells, lytic, efficient, a molecular can opener applied to living tissue. Azaspiricids stage a many-organ misadventure whose calling card is nausea that feels punitive. Overtoxins, cousins of palitoxin, can blow in from blooms of Ostreopsis. Palitoxin itself, not a bloom classic but a reminder from coral-associated organisms, is so potent it converts your sodium-potassium pump, a fundamental life support machine, into a permanently open channel. If saxitoxin is a lock and brevetoxin is a wedge, palitoxin is a crowbar taken to the doorframe. Meanwhile, a quieter but equally ruthless mechanism is at work. Not molecules, but math. Even non-toxic blooms can flatten a fishery just by existing in the wrong numbers. When a bloom peaks and collapses, the rain of dead cells is a buffet for bacteria. They feast, they respire, and oxygen slides off the table. Hypoxia turns gills into ornaments. Add a thin veneer of mucus, the slime some algae exude under stress, and you have literal suffocation plumbing backed up with biology. It's not poisoning, it's drowning, executed in slow motion by microbes. Marine animals don't fall all at once, they stagger species by species, weakness by weakness. Shellfish are the patient conspirators. They filter the water, busy little vacuum cleaners with pearls on their resumes, and in doing so they concentrate whatever's swirling through it. Many don't get sick, they just become libraries of poison shelved under delicious. A single mussel can stockpile enough saxitoxin to make a meal a neurological seminar. Cooking fails because these aren't proteins you can denature with heat, they're a stubborn, heat-stable small molecules. Freezing is just a polite pause button on everything except the toxin. Birds pick up the story at the surface. Gulls and pelicans crash diet on dead fish studded with brevetoxin, stagger downwind, and become clumsy flyers that don't quite navigate pylons. Kelp gulls that peck at domoic acid-loaded anchovies suddenly wobble and fall from the air like they forgot gravity's terms of service. Seabirds show up on beaches with wings half open, heads tilted, eyes making little loops as if trying to wind back to time. People think oil spill because oil is visible and human and morally satisfying to blame. Sometimes it's invisible chemistry, transported up the chain by a food web that was just doing its job. Mammals tell a harder tale. Manatees lumber through Florida bloom plumes, filter feeding their respectable way through 1,000 pounds of seagrass a day, and quietly gather brevetoxin like obedient data points. The outcome can be a mortality event that reads as sudden from the shore but has been accumulating for weeks inside their tissues. Sea lions, those slick comedians of the Pacific, go still on a beach because a diatom pulled a cruel trick on their hippocampus. Dolphins, apex sprinters wired for echolocation fireworks, inhale aerosolized toxins and cough like asthmatics. You cannot tell a dolphin it's just red water. You can only watch its lungs argue with a molecule from a plankton it didn't even eat. People always ask, why would algae make these in the first place? As if motive would help us forgive the crime. The answer is the murky field of chemical ecology. Some toxins likely deter grazers. Saxitoxin is a pretty persuasive no thank you to a copepod diner. Others are allelopathic, chemical elbowing that suppresses competitor algae or stresses their predators. Some we suspect are metabolic accidents rewarded by natural selection because the side effect happened to be useful. A few, like domoic acid, may help with iron acquisition by collating metals in a stingy ocean. The algae are not scheming, they're iterating. Evolution is the most patient R&D department on Earth. Regulators fight back with rituals that feel like exorcisms. Scattered along coastlines are labs where technicians grind shellfish into homogenates, run them through assays, historically grimly with mice, increasingly with LC-MS and antibody kits, and stamp entire bays open or shut based on numbers that represent lives not yet lost. Fishermen watch the bulletin boards like gamblers reading tape, and restaurants learn the hard way that local fresh is a love language with caveats. Communities adjust their calendars. Razor clam weekends evaporate, oyster festivals pivot to music and denial, and dinner conversations get a little more meteorological. Where did the wind blow today? Which way is the surf? If you want to see the molecules in action, you could shrink yourself down and sit on the synapse. Watch a vesicle release glutamate into the gap. See domoic acid elbow in and hold the receptor open like a rude friend who won't stop telling a story. Or plant yourself on a node of Ranvier and feel saxitoxins slide into the pore, snug as a key put in the right lock, while the action potential that would normally sprint down the axon smacks into silence. Tape yourself to a pufferfish's sodium channel after a assiduous toxin tweak, and you'll realise why reversal of hot and cold is not poetry but a recalibration error in thermoreceptor neurons. Sit on a gill filament sluiced with brevetoxins chaos, and you'll understand why a fish tries to leap. The water is suddenly airless, even when it's oxygen rich, because the signal telling the gill how to move has gone to mush. The ocean is practical about disposing of evidence. Toxins dilute, degrade, or get locked into sediments with time. Scavengers vacuum up the dead. A storm turns the page. But before the cleanup, there's the harvest. Crabs plucking out fish eyes like tiny surgeons. Rays mouthing across a buffet they didn't earn. Gulls too cautious to land still orbiting, waiting for the air to stop biting. In the shallows, eelgrass wavers, coated in a film of cells whose grand strategy fits on one page. Make food from light. Edit the neighbourhood with secondary metabolites. Let physics handle the rest. You can get lost in the subplots. The biotransformation of toxins inside animals. Saxitoxin congeners shuffled by the shellfish livers into forms we consider more or less toxic. The way lipophilic toxins, fat-loving little things, hide in the oily tissues of predators, and hydrophilic ones race through the bloodstream like they own it. The fact that some grazers develop partial tolerance, a local arms race scaled to millimetres, The tiny regulatory details, closure levels in parts per million that hide real terror under decimal points. The science is crisp and meticulous. The beach is not. Every so often a bloom blends the weapons, low oxygen below, bioluminescent showmanship at night, a faint peppering of aerosolized neurotoxin at the surface, and a reef nearby quietly loading ciguatoxins into a food web that will express its symptoms 3 dinners from now. It's almost elegant. A multi-front siege dressed in a sunset. Even the soundscape changes. Fewer splashes in the shallows, fewer pops of snapping shrimp, a hush where there should be fiddler crabs and little fish writing silver letters in the dusk. Stand there long enough and you'll catch yourself listening for something you can't hear. The click of a sodium channel stuck shut. The whispered hiss of a gill inflamed. The soft arithmetic of a toxin meeting its receptor and making a decision on behalf of an entire animal. The smallest villains never step into the light to take credit. They don't need to. A warm night, a still surface, a nutrient pulse, and the molecules go to work. Tidy, precise, incurious. The tide rolls up with foam the colour of tea leaves and the shore arranges its exhibits. A sheaf of anchovies like spilled mercury, a crab on its back working invisible pedals, a gull standing on one foot as if deep in thought. Somewhere offshore, a pod of dolphins skirts the bloom's edge, echolocating through a glittering blue that looks like magic and coughs like a warning, while a school of fish holds together too tightly, as if numbers could outvote chemistry. When the curtain drops on a mass extinction, the stagehands are microbes. The big animals are gone or gasping. The forests are charcoal and splinters. The rivers run the colour of tea steeped in a burned library. Rain hammers down, steeped in acid from ash-clogged skies, stripping hillsides slick and feeding the sea a nutrient cocktail no one ordered, and everyone will drink. The ocean looks calm from a cliff, flat as grief, but inside it, succession begins, the ruthless kind you see after wildfires. First the ash-loving colonists, then the scrappy shrubs. In seawater, the pioneers are single-celled, flagellated, patient. They have seed banks sleeping in the mud and a clock set not by hope but by physics. It happens after every catastrophe worth capitalizing. After the Great Dying, when the Permian folded into the Triassic with the subtlety of a trapdoor, the shelves went quiet. Burrows vanished from the sediment like erased signatures. The seafloor stopped breathing. Microbial carpets unrolled across the shallows, stromatolites and other mats that hadn't ruled like this since long before fish grew teeth, because the usual grazers, the polite lawnmowers of the benthos, were gone, or too few or too tired to bite. If you could have walked that seafloor in a pressure suit, you would have seen textures that looked ancient even then. Laminated domes, wrinkled sheets, anachronistic faces, a fancy way of saying the past came back because no one was left to eat it. In the water column, disaster plankton took their bow. Think prasinophyte algae, ancient green loners with tough-walled cysts that make excellent time capsules. They love a world knocked flat, low competition, lots of light, just enough nutrients, and a predator guild reduced to rumours. Dinoflagellates, the drama majors of the plankton, joined in with cyst banks cracked open by storms and warmth. Some years the blooms were modest, other years they turned coastlines into oxidized bruise colours, a reminder that when the food web collapses, the smallest things don't mourn, they multiply. The rock record reads like a coroner's ledger. Black shales stack up, glossy as spilled ink, each sheet a page from a season when the bottom waters forgot oxygen existed. Framboids, little raspberries of iron sulfide, pepper those layers. Delicate and sinister, ulms that you groan in the calm dark like mould in a sealed ewer. trace metals climb, molybdenum, uranium, because anoxic seas hoard them. Carbon isotopes swing, the breath of the planet hitching between gulps. If you're the sort who sniffs rocks, and some are, you might catch a faint sulfur ghost from a million nights of microbial breath. Somewhere in those same shales, molecular fossils whisper the colours of the old poison, pigments from green and purple sulfur bacteria that flourished when hydrogen sulfide reached the light, painting shallows with the palette of a bruise that never heals. On land, the script is familiar too. Charcoal lines mark forests that went up like tinder. Then comes the fern spike, pioneer plants unfurling as if someone flipped a green switch. In the rivers, pulse after pulse of sediment and phosphorus and iron flows seaward. The continents bleeding into the basins. Estuaries go stratified under warm lids and fresh lenses. The sea takes the gift with the politeness of a predator. Thank you, I'll make more life now, but not the kind you want. Early survivors are small, not just in numbers but in body. Paleontologists gave it a tidy name, the Lilliput effect. After cataclysm, the world runs on miniatures. Shells shrink, spines shrink, everything trims its ambitions because oxygen is scarce and food is erratic and survival is a budget. If you're a bivalve, you specialise in being hard to offend. If you're a brachiopod with a taste for mud, you go on living as if nothing happened, because tragedy favours those who are never glamorous. If you're a jellyfish, you don't even shrow. You simply expand into real estate others can't afford, an empire of bells and trailing stings drifting over a bottom that has lost its gardeners. And the blooms, my God, the blooms. In a world where mixing is weak and nutrients are strong, the photic zone becomes an assembly line. Daylight pours in, cells double, shade deepens, oxygen spikes, and then slides. Nights hum with respiration, and the column sinks toward unbreathable. The bloom crashes, the snow falls, flocks and pellets and strings of dead things into the hungry zone where bacteria, inheritors of everything, burn carbon and write IOUS in oxygen. Sediments that once smelled like salt start to smell like matches. Worms stop stitching the seafloor into oxygenated lace. The fabric unravels into tight, undisturbed laminae. You could count like tree rings if the tree were laid down by a quiet apocalypse. It's not just the end Permian. Roll the reel to the Endovonian and the Kelwasser and Hangenberg pulses. Reefs cough, black shales flower across basins, prasinophyte disaster forms spike like emergency flares. Scroll to the Toarcian of the early Jurassic. Volcanism warms the world, rivers fatten, oxygen leaves the room, and again the shales and the sulfur bacteria take dictation. Pan to the mid-Cretaceous, OAE 1A, OAE 2, when greenhouse seas turned vast regions into oxygen debtors and the bottom went ink dark for so long that entire mountain ranges today are dressed in their funerary clothes. Different casts, same director, warmth, stillness, nutrients, time. Of course, sometimes the catastrophe wasn't a slow-cooked greenhouse, but a single rock with bad manners. The Chicxulub impact slammed the lights off across the planet, and photosynthesis failed like a chore nobody did. Plankton collapsed. The elegant chalk architects, coccolithophores and foraminifera, blinked out or dwindled to a few prickly survivors, and then, when the dust settled and daylight came back like a forgotten bill, blooms surged in fits and starts. In the newborn Paleocene, scrappy opportunistic plankton, the kind your professor calls weedy, ruled the early days, while along coastlines the rivers, still unruly, poured in more nutrients than the food webs could chew. Shellbeds record the stuttered recovery, empty, then packed with one or two hardy species, then slowly, with painful patience, threaded with diversity again. Disaster taxa are not supervillains. They are the second responders, the ones who show up when the oxygen's low, the light is harsh, and the neighbourhood watch has resigned. In the earliest Triassic, thin-shelled bivalves like chloria paved shelves in cheap armour, while ammonoids, those coiled opportunists, evolved like they had a dare going. Lingulid brachiopods, unchanged since forever, quietly took their corner. Sponges found ways to keep pumping in slow water. Microbialites built cities out of slime and sand. The message is not life died. The message is life lowered its expectations and got on with it. Every so often the ocean tried to right itself. Storm seasons punched holes in the lids, upwelling stitched deep oxygen back into the fabric. Short-lived returns of burrows appear in the strata, like promising text never followed by a call, but feedbacks are faithful. Anoxic bottoms leak phosphorus. Leaked phosphorus feeds surface blooms, blooms die and sink. Sinking biomass steals more oxygen, the bottom stays anoxic. Healthy seas are virtuous cycles. Sick seas are habits. The recovery is a ladder with missing rungs. You can climb it, but you'll scrape your shins and a lot of you won't make it. If you're keeping time with a geologist's metronome, recovery is not a montage, it's a residency. 10,000 years feels like a sigh. 1,000,000 feels like a weekend getaway. Whole epochs sit in the waiting room. Diversity returns as if it were hauling itself up a mud slope, one trembling experimental lineage at a time. Reef architects audition, fail, audition again. Predators reinvent speed, then teeth, then teamwork. Grazers repopulate the lawnmower union and microbial carpets retreat to cryptic corners. By the time the oceans are lively again, the cast list has names that didn't exist before the fall, and the old favourites are myths. But before the comeback, the ocean throws an encore for the smallest royals. Blooms that can turn night into blue electric fizz and day into tea. Tides that smell like copper pennies and rotten eggs. Coastlines where the only sound is the soft clatter of shells in waves because everything that vocalised has left. The chemistry pushes strange side plots. Sulfide boating up towards sunlight, where purple and green bacteria unfurl translucent parasols. Elemental sulfur forming milky veils that give the water a chalky cataract. Trace metals switching valence like quick-change artists at the redox boundary. It looks alien. It is us, just recalculated. If you want evidence that the ocean keeps receipts, open a slab. See the laminations. No burrows, no churn, just paper-thin sheets of calm death. Find the framboids, tiny metal blackberries that form only where oxygen is a rumour. Measure the isotopes and watch the line wobble at the exact places in the rock where the world fell, and then try to stand up again. And if you have a very good lab and a very gentle hand, chase the shadows of ancient pigments, molecular fossils with Brock names, that say, clearly as any diary, the sun reached here, the sulfide reached here, and in between them, life took advantage. There is an unromantic lesson hiding in the apocalypse glamour. Every end of the world in the record, abrupt or lingering, eventually functioned like a reset button that privileged patience, smallness, and trickery. The bloom makers were always ready. They didn't mourn, they waited. They didn't plan, they persisted. When the forest returned, they receded. When mixing strengthened, they thinned. When grazers rebuilt their teeth and their numbers, they retreated to cycles and seasons. But when the lid came back and the pantry refilled by volcano, by climate drift, by asteroids aftermath, they were there with the old script, running the same lines. Multiply, shade, starve the depths, take the oxygen, leave a black page for someone to read later and call event. And again, not because the ocean loves drama, but because the rules make drama when nudged. Warm the surface, slow the stir, bleed the land, dim the winds, and the smallest things will do what they have always done after a world ends. They will turn light into fuel, fuel into numbers, numbers into shadows, and shadows into nights that smell like matches and old pennies. They will write the hangover in chemistry. They will keep the lights on, for themselves at least, until the rest of life remembers how to breathe. The evidence doesn't glowy red in the rocks. It arrives as crumbs and shadows, confetti from parties the ocean threw and then tried to forget. You don't dig up a prehistoric red tide like a fossilized wave. You unroll the tape by proxy. A core comes up from a basin floor, 2 meters of mud that smells like a wet match, and the lab becomes a crime scene. Gloves, scalpel, a logbook. Every centimetre is a year or 10 or 50, depending on how politely the sediment fell. You split it open, and the pages of the diary stare back. Pale grey where life stirred the mud, glossy black where life stopped stirring anything at all. Start with the most charming witness, the sleeper seeds. Many dinoflagellates, when the season turns or life gets stressful, make resting cysts, tiny armoured eggs with walls built from dinosporin, a polymer that might as well be Time's Teflon. They settle into the sediment like stubborn glitter at the end of a parade. Millennia later, a palynologist drops that mud into a beaker, adds a cocktail of acids that would terrify a spoon, and everything dissolves but the cysts and their equally immortal cousins. Pollen, spores, the little hard things the earth refuses to forget. Rinse, sieve, mount microscope. On the slide, spiky spheres, burrs, ellipses with sculpted ornament. Each species a different piece of jewellery. Count them per gram. Plot them up core. And there it is. A spike. 10, 20, 100 times the background. Like the breathless chorus of a bloom repeating across the years. The bloom itself is gone. Its password remains. Those cysts don't just say more or less. They tell moods. Some belong to species that prefer calm, stratified water, others to muscular mixing. Some scream coastal, others whisper open shelf. You can watch a coastline change character as climate nudges and rivers push, and the sea tries on different thermoclines like seasonal coats. In some layers you meet the weedy pioneers, forms that crash the party after upheaval, the disaster taxa of the plankton world, showing up thick in the same centimetres where burrows vanish and the colour tips toward ink. Now zoom out from the grains and listen to the fabric. Healthy seafloors are messy, peppered with worm tracks, little tubes, the scribble of creatures tilling and breathing the mud, all of it a quiet remix of sediment and oxygen. In the core, that chaos becomes texture, the ichnofabric, smudged layers, mottling, no 2 millimeters alike. Then, as if a switch flips, the chaos stops. Laminae settle in paper-thin sheets you could peel with a razor, each one a calm deposit laid on a bottom where nothing burrowed because the water above had forgotten how to inhale. You can count them like tree rings when the basin is kind. Seasonal pairs in some modern analogues, an annual fog of fine particles in others. Each lamina a night when oxygen blinked, each stack a season when the sea held its breath. If you want proof the breath really left, call in the metal accountants. Run the core under an XRF scanner, a box that hums invisibly and tosses back a barcode of elements, and watch certain lines surge in the black intervals. Molybdenum, uranium, vanadium. Those are redox tattletales. Oxygenated waters don't hoard them, anoxic waters do, especially when sulfide prowls. The ratios matter. Molybdenum loves downright euxinia. Uranium climbs even in quiet oxygen debt. Stack them with total organic carbon and the core narrates its own suffocation. First a nutrient pulse, then a microbial feast, then oxygen leaving the chat, then metals checking in. It's not poetry, but the peaks and troughs write stanzas anyway. Turn the lamp brighter and look for framboids, tiny raspberries of pyrite grown from iron and sulfide. Under a microscope they're absurdly pretty, perfect little berry clusters, black and glittering. Their sizes are testimonies. Small, tight, uniform framboids often mean the sulfidic zone reached into the water column itself, where crystals formed quickly and consistently. Big, sloppy, varied framboids are more likely diagenetic, grown later in the mud. Measure 100 of them, and you've basically interrogated the chemocline from the convenience of a thin section. Euxinia doesn't sign forms, it drops raspberries. Chemical ghosts are louder still. The organic molecules that plankton once wore like clothes sometimes survive burial. Altered, but recognizable enough to be pointed at. Dinosterane, a steroid tweaked just so, waves from the page and says dinoflagellates were here. Isorenieratane, a sunburned pigment's descendant, whispers of green sulfur bacteria living where sunlight and sulfide overlapped, a bruise-coloured photic zone that should unsettle anyone who swims. 2-methylhopanines, once thought to be the sole autograph of cyanobacteria, now known to have cameo writers, still hint that the surface was a cyanobacterial soup. Line those biomarkers up against the metal enrichments and the laminations and you get a triangulation. Not a guess, a consensus. Sometimes the diary adds photos. Modern basins that flirt with anoxia, Santa Barbara, Cariacaco, the Black Sea, lay down varves so fine you can catch seasonality. Spring blooms in lighter layers, winter dust in darker. A summer of stillness remembered in a sheet as thin as an onion skin. Fish scales glint in those pages like confetti, ichthyoliths that survived by being made of enamel and luck. A few cores even preserve thin, pale drapes of volcanic ash, calendar pages with dates, so you can pin a year on a pulse of suffocation with the confidence of a librarian slipping a card into a pocket. Filed, labelled, cross-referenced. There's a smell to all of this, part mud, part sulphur, part old library. Crack a black shale and you sometimes get a breath of the original chemistry. A rotten egg ghost from sulfate reducers too busy to sign their work. That same shale reflects light like lacquer. You can polish it, but the shine is already there, written by organic carbon that never met a scavenger. It's called sapropel in the Mediterranean, putrid mud, because geologists are romantics only by accident, and whole slabs of it record times when African monsoons fed the sea until it drowsed under its own excess. The microfossils in these layers are a chorus that keeps changing key. Diatom frustules, glass houses shaped like snowflakes and hatboxes, tell of silica and cold water and upwelling. Their absence says something else. Warmth, stratification, or just a different ingredient list. Foraminifera, the sangrain-sized house builders that pick up carbon isotopes like journalist quotes, go through personality changes. In oxygen-rich bottoms, diverse communities churn and stamp the mud. In lean times, a few gritty opportunists dominate. Miniature shells crowding the slides like tenements. Sometimes they disappear altogether. At those depths, the only bioturbation is gravity. The isotopes are the margin notes in neat handwriting. Delta 13C in organic matter rises and falls, tracking how the ocean's carbon budget yo-yoed as the blooms did their accountancy, locking carbon in bodies, burying some, respiring the rest. Delta 15N climbs when denitrification removes the lighter isotope and leaves the heavier signature behind. A clear mark that oxygen was missing, where bacteria turned nitrate back into gas. Sulfur isotope move as pyrite soaks up reduced sulfur, a ledger of electron traffic down in the dark. If you've ever wanted to hear bacteria count, this is their clicker. Do not forget the express elevator evidence. When a bloom peaks and collapses, its wreckage aggregates. Sticky, mucousy flocks the size of peas and walnuts and drops. These are fecal pellet rockets, diatom chains glued together with the plankton's own exudates, mini snowballs that fall faster than single cells could ever dream of. In varved basins, you get entire laminae that are nothing but compacted marine snow, a blizzard laid gently on a carpet no worm dared ruffle. Between those layers you sometimes find faint, pale smears, bursts of oxygenated interruption, a storm's finger mixing the top few meters and granting a week of breath. The sea's handwriting hesitates, then resumes its even script. And then there's the new evidence, the kind with sequencers and bioinformaticians muttering into coffee. Sedimentary ancient DNA, SEDI DNA, persists in fragments, little letters from plankton and fish and bacteria embedded in mud. Pull a core, pull the nucleic acid, and you can sometimes catch the fingerprints of bloom makers spiking where the cyst said they would. Not pristine, never complete, but add it to the cyst counts and the biomarkers, and suddenly the rock has voices, not just silhouettes. It isn't all microscopic. There are fossil fish kills recorded as mass graves, laminated slabs where herring-sized bodies would stack heads to tails in a geometry that reads strangulation rather than predation. No bite marks, no scatter, just a uniform yawning of mouths, an artist's charcoal drawing of panic. In other places you find entire reefs drifted over with lime mud and microbial fabric. Corals stopped mid-growth, as if someone pulled the plug on the partnership with their resident algae, and the neighbourhood went quiet for a century. Above those horizons, microbialites bubble up, lumpy domes built by communities of bacteria and trapped grains, a renaissance of ancient architecture that only reappears when grazers and oxygen both take vacation. Sometimes you get lucky and the ocean leaves a margin comment in bright ink. A layer rich in phosphorus, a hard spike, as if the sediment coughed up a nutrient bank all at once, served to prime the next bloom, and right above it the cysts and isorenaeretane answer in tandem. Elsewhere, a thin horizon of iron monosulfides marks a moment when sulfides surged into light, froze into mineral mid-gesture, and fell like confetti none of the usual janitors were alive to sweep. At the centimetre scale, the record toggles between breath and hold. At the metre scale, it's a metronome of habit. The beauty of this forensic kit is redundancy. Cysts alone might fool you. Maybe it's drifted in from elsewhere. Laminae alone might be a quiet basin, not truly anoxic. Metals alone can be mobile, but line them up, laminae plus tiny framboids plus molybdenum kisses plus sulfur bacteria pigments, and the bluff is called. The sea went bad here at this time repeatedly enough to matter. And when you correlate that to ash layers with radiometric dates, to global isotope excursions that echo in limestones a continent away, to chapters we've already named, Toarcian Anoxic Event OAE2, you realise you're not holding a local diary. You're paging a chapter the whole ocean wrote. Even the absence is evidence. In healthy muds, burrows are everywhere. Planolites, chondrites, the pleasant cursive of things living just under the line. Where blooms and anoxia rule, those signatures vanish. The ichnofabric index slides to 0. Nature stops doodling and starts printing single-spaced, no margin notes, no commentary. It's unnerving how tidy death can be when oxygen leaves the room, and yet the record is not monotone. Between black spells there are grey compromises. A weekly burrowed interval says oxygen poked its head in. A diversity bloom in forums hints at a lucky decade of storms. A drop in dinosterane accompanied by a rise in alkanons, the waxy markers of haptophytes, suggests a different cast took the stage under a cooler sky or a leaner river. The sea keeps changing the locks, and you can tell which key fit by which molecule got left behind. You might think this all too inferential, too much tea leaf reading with a mass spectrometer. But the modern ocean is a helpful laboratory. Pull a core from the Santa Barbara Basin spanning the last century, and you can match black laminae to known droughts and warm spells, to fisheries records of sardine booms and busts, to newspaper reports of foul air on the pier. In the Black Sea, you can trace the boundary where oxygen vanished after the last glacial pulse and never quite returned, a permanent chemocline recorded as a line you can point to with a finger. The proxies are not magic, they're calibration. So the confetti builds up. Cysts spike, laminae stack, metals whisper, raspberries glitter, pigments smoulder, scales wink, DNA fragments murmur, and the mud itself keeps the smell of matches. You start with a dull cylinder of sediment and end with a timeline that reads like a heartbeat. Spike, crash, breath, hold again. The colour never shows up as crimson in the core. Red tide was always a trick of light on living water. In rock, the hue is accounting, lack for carbon, pale for breathing, metallic for chemistry, iridescent for the way time can make even poison beautiful. And on a shelf in the lab, next to the acids and the sieves, there's a tray of little glass slides, each one labelled with the sort of quiet specificity science prefers. Depths, date, basin, coordinates. Held to the light, they glitter with the armour of the dead, dinoflagellate cysts like tiny crowns and helmets, pollen from a forest long burned and regrown, shards of diatom glass. Fossil confetti, yes, but not thrown to celebrate. Thrown because the smallest rulers never leave a note. They leave breadcrumbs. And the earth, patient as silt, keeps them all. First, fire. At the polite kind you roast marshmallows on, continental scale furnaces opening along seams in the earth, and pouring out lava until maps need new colours. Large igneous provinces, Siberian traps, Karoo-Ferrar, Ontong Java, Deccan, the sort of names that sound like villain syndicates because functionally they were. Basalt floods for 1,000,000 years is not a tantrum, it's a policy. CO2 surges into the sky like a second atmosphere. SO2 follows, pulling rain a notch towards battery acid. Halogens chew on the ozone like bored dogs gnawing drywall. You get a climate that staggers, brief volcanic winters, long greenhouse hangovers, and somewhere in that lurching the oceans settle under a warm lid that tells the wind-driven mixing take 5. Plankton hear that and translate it into, we're open all night. Fire is hungry even when it's cooled into rock. Fresh basalt weathers like it hasn't learned boundaries, bleeding phosphorus and iron from minerals that look innocent until rain finds them. Phosphorus is the ocean's favourite hard-to-get nutrient, usually locked in minerals or buried in mud. Storm a continent with the acid rain, turn forests into charcoal, grind soils off slopes, and suddenly phosphorus isn't playing coy. Rivers carry it seaward in slick brown pulses, iron rides along as trace metals entourage, and every estuary downstream becomes a banquet hall with no dress code. Warm, stratified and overfed. Ash is the multivitamin nobody asked for. A single eruption can dust a basin with glassy shards ground fine as talc, stuffed with the trace metals phytoplankton hoard like rare stamps. Iron, copper, zinc, some of it sinks, some of it dissolves just enough to whisper go to cells waiting near the surface. If you've never watched an ocean change personality overnight, picture this. Yesterday's water was a quiet tea. Today's has the sharp caffeinated sheen of a double shot. Light's the same, physics is the same, but with the right micronutrients, the smallest things shift from we're getting by to make room. And then flood. Not the timid overbank kind. Rainfall regimes change when the planet heats, monsoons flex, storm tracks migrate, the hydrologic cycle does CrossFit, and rivers answer by turning feral. They drink hillsides, swallow towns, if towns existed, and sprint to the coast carrying a slurry of carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus, and also soot, and also bits of forest that used to moderate this exact nonsense. When that fresh water hits the sea, it spreads as a low salinity veil. a lens so buoyant it floats above the denser ocean like oil on vinegar. Halocline plus thermocline equals pycnocline, density's concrete ceiling. Wind can rattle the roof all it wants, the apartment stays sealed. Give that lens a week of sun and a few polite breezes, and the surface layer becomes a greenhouse with no vent. Photosynthesis shouts. Nights turn into slow suffocation drills. Geometry piles on. When sea level climbs, as it tends to in greenhouses, the world grows more shallow seas. Epicontinental bathtubs draped over continents, connected to the open ocean by sill-choked straits. They look generous on a map. In practice, they're traps. Water comes in, water goes out slowly, the bottom sits far from the reach of storms. Stratify them and they stay that way, so a Bloom's riot upstairs can drain oxygen from the downstairs for months. Fjords do the same trick at boutique scale. A threshold at the mouth, deep basins inside, one clogged drain between them, and the fresh air outside. You don't need an entire ocean to go wrong. A basin with bad architecture will do. Wind matters more than weather forecasts ever admit. Trade winds relax a little, the equator to pole temperature gradient softens, and mixing loses its punch. Upwelling, nature's nutrition plan, can stall, leaving shelf waters sunlit and starved for the kind of turbulence that keeps the pantry honest. Other times the opposite happens. Upwelling shoals the oxygen minimum zone onto the shelf, bathing coastal water in a breath that was already thin. In that twilight, grazers work slower, predators waste effort, and phytoplankton that light life on easy mode start calling their friends. Either flavour of wind shift can favour blooms. Both share the same moral. If you make the surface stable and say, "Here, have nutrients," the smallest things will behave like they have seen the script and came prepared to improvise. Deserts breathe into this story. Drier continent and dust lift you off in sheets. Iron-rich, fine-grained, aerodynamically gifted, and crosses oceans like gossip. In high-nutrient, low-chlorophyll regions where iron is the tightest screw, a single dust pulse can light cyanobacteria like a fuse. Trichodesmium, the rust-coloured sea sawdust sailors used to complain about, floats, fixes its own nitrogen with enzymes so iron-hungry they might as well carry magnets, and writes a smug note to the nitrogen cycle. The payoff isn't just its own biomass. Fixed nitrogen leaks back out, easing the bottleneck for everyone else. Now you've primed the water for something redder, browner, denser. There are weirder triggers. Deglaciation pours meltwater into the ocean in fits so dramatic we've given them names that sound like haunted ships. Freshwater caps the North Atlantic, overturning circulation hiccups. Oxygen sags at depth. Nutrient routing changes like someone swapped the plumbing. Even without a global conveyor belt plot twist, glacier-fed floods can deliver silica loads that push diatom booms, followed by stratification that lets other players, dinoflagellates cyanobacteria, inherit the afternoon. The baton passes awkwardly, but the race keeps going. Impact events are the one-night stands of geologic forcing, everything all at once, then the hangover. A rock hits, the sky goes dark, photosynthesis faceplants, food webs collapse, but when the dust settles and light returns, the continents, freshly burned, freshly pulverized, bleed nutrients with undignified enthusiasm. Rivers carry nitrate and phosphate like guilt. Lakes overturn odd. Coasts inherit plumes so thick they may as well be fertilizer ads. Bloom cycles follow not because asteroids love algae, but because disaster creates exactly the physical and chemical stage blooms request. Stillness, warmth, and a pantry where the locks have been politely removed. Biology triggers biology. Remove the filter feeders, the oysters, sponges and micrograzers that could keep a coastal bloom below scandal, and you free the water column to make bad decisions. After some extinctions, the lawnmower guild of the seafloor retires en masse, and microbial mats rise to a management position. In the plankton, grazers shrivel or migrate or suffer a toxin wave, and the next generation of algae smirks and doubles. It does not take deliberate malice. Food webs are machines, and removing one gear is often enough. Tectonics is the clockmaker with long patience. Close a seaway, goodbye easy Pacific-Atlantic gossip. Stack a mountain range where wind must now wring itself out as rain. Hello Monsoon 2.0. Open a mid-ocean ridge that exhales hydrothermal iron like incense. Current paths shift. Upwelling nodes pivot. Basins that used to be well ventilated get moved gently over millions of years under atmospheric patterns that favour lids. None of it is fast. All of it matters when the question is, will this water mix, or will it sit and think about what it's done until oxygen leaves in a huff? Even the sun's paperwork, orbital cycles that tweak how and where sunlight falls, plays a supporting role. Tilt, wobble, and ellipse change the strength of seasons and the reach of monsoons. A stronger summer on a given continent drenches it. Rivers run rich, coastal lenses grow fat, stratification gets combative. A weaker summer turns dust up, iron writes its name across the subtropical oceans. Harmful blooms aren't married to one driver. They speed date. Any combination that warms the lid, feeds the pantry, and quiets the mixing gets a second date. The recipe card reads stupidly simple: heat, stillness, nutrients, time. But the spice rack is crowded. Wildfire ash delivers soluble phosphorus in a form that bypasses the usual customs. Volcanic glass shards offer surfaces where trace metals leach and sick, tiny vending machines floating in the sunlit layer. Dissolved organic carbon from a churned watershed gives mixotrophic dinoflagellates something to sip between photon courses. Even the shape of the coastline matters. Embayments that trap water like cupped hands, headlands that curl currents into eddies, deltas that fan out plumes like ribbons. There's no single moustache-twirling culprit. There's an ensemble cast, each playing its note until the chord becomes menacing. Once the bloom starts, it helps itself. Cells shade the water, pushing competitors beneath their compensation depths. Nights love a surface crowded with breathers. Dead cells fall and coach the deep microbes to burn the remaining oxygen. Anoxic muds, freed from the iron grip that normally locks phosphate away, burp it back into the water like a guilty confession. The next bloom grows on nutrients that were supposed to be buried, and the cycle clicks into place. That's the rude grace of positive feedbacks. They do not need vigour, only persistence. If you want a smaller, meaner trigger, sail a river through a heatwave. For a week, afternoon thunderstorms knock a city's nitrogen down the storm drains, sewage plants cough under load, and the estuary exhales bubbles that glitter with the wrong promise. Switch city for freshly deglaciated plain, or volcanic plateau scraped by acid rain, and you have the ancient version. Brief pulses, rude consequences. A breeze might rescue the water column, or it might not. The ocean is generous with second chances, and equally generous with reminders that physics doesn't negotiate. There's a theatricality to how all this aligns. Fire below writes the climate and sprinkles the pantry. Flood above delivers the groceries and sets the table. Wind decides how serious the seating chart is. Geometry locks the doors. Dust sends the invitations. Biology shows up overdressed. After that, no villain monologue is required. Microscopic cells with tastes older than bones do what they do best. Divide, drift, shade, starve, sink, repeat. You stand on a shore that smells like pennies and matches, watch the water turn bruised brown to wine red to tea, and know, whether you want to or not, that somewhere a mountain rained itself into the sea, somewhere a lava plain shrugged at time, some were a desert-breathed iron, and that was enough. At night, the ocean pretends to be kind. It rolls in without sound, and then, when a wave collapses, when your foot cuts a V through the shallows, the water ignites. Not orange, not fire, a clean surgical blue that looks cooler than space and somehow hotter than flame, 1,000 sparks stitched into the skin of the sea. People call it magic because mechanosensitive proton channel opening that acidifies intracellular vesicles to trigger a luciferin-luciferase reaction inside membrane-bound syntions is a mouthful on a beach. The truth is that every flash is a tiny battery dumping its charge. Dinoflagellates keep their light in packets, syntions, tucked under the cell membrane during the day like a pocket knife and march to the surface at dusk by their circadian clock. Stretch the membrane, shear it, nudge it with the turbulence of an incoming wave, and they answer. With a light millisecond spasms, 1 to 2 seconds of glow if they're feeling generous. A burglar alarm, but gorgeous. You can see the logic if you're very small and very edible. A copepod lunges at a dinoflagellate and kicks the switch. The water flares. Somewhere nearby, a bigger predator, anchovy, lanternfish, something with a mouth and poor impulse control, homes in on the glow and snaps at the copepod that thought it was alone. Burglar alarm is what the biologists call it. Snitching by LED might be closer to the vibe. It works well enough that the luminous species keep doing it, ticking on and off with a precision set not by a sunrise app, but by a protein clock older than our calendars. Their bioluminescence is gated to the night. You can shake them all you want at noon and get nothing but offended silence. Under the microscope, the light is a choreography you don't see at scale. The cells pass an electrical wave along their vacuole membranes. Yes, plants of a sort with action potentials because evolution loves a callback and proton channels pop. The pH inside the scintillon drops. Luciferase wakes up mean. Luciferin goes through its little oxidation drama. Photons spill out blue because that's where the energy and chemistry agreed to meet. All of this is for another time it takes you to point and say look, which is why the water looks like a memory rather than a lamp. The flash can be resent many times, but cells have budgets. Run them low and the show fades. Walk the shoreline of a prehistoric lagoon in your mind and the scene gets stranger. The day has been hot enough to melt your patience. The bloom is dense, some species armoured, some naked, some half plant, half hunter with a taste for smaller cells. By late afternoon the surface layer is thick as soup and the oxygen profile already leaning toward trouble. Then the sun slips, the wind eases, and the first mullet breaks the surface. The impact ripples outward. Every ripple is a strike on a matchbox. For a minute the surf is embroidered with blue. A shoal turns in unison and writes cursive onto the dark. The outline of a mosasaur or a smaller reptile, something inquisitive and hungry, flares ghost blue as it shoulders through the top meter, glowing not from within but from the outrage of 1,000 cells brushing teeth against its scales. Even ammonites would have been haloed when they drove their shell lips through the top few centimeters to sip air or hunt in the halo. Predator becomes neon sign, prey becomes arrow. The night is a conspiracy of light against stealth. The trick is that the same bloom that throws a midnight rave is a day killer. Sun up, the blue turns off and the water remembers its other work. Shading everything below, gulping nutrients, exhaling and inhaling on a breath that doesn't keep up. By late morning, oxygen is locally high where the light is thick, supersaturated veneers where photosynthesis has sprinted ahead. But the story of a bloom is never about noon in the top 10 centimeters. It's about the payback in the evening and the debt in the deep. Night falls, photosynthesis clocks out, and a billion tiny stomachs keep breathing. Oxygen slopes down hour by hour like a dimmer switch. Down below the thermocline, the bacteria are counting carbon and cashing it in for O2. If the water won't mix, the meter hits 0. fish with options leave, fish without options become geology in progress. Even in daylight, the glamour cracks. Some blooms exude mucus when stressed, a slick, invisible soup that clogs gills like wet paper. Some spray their neighbourhood with tiny amounts of toxins that don't care if you can pronounce them. Brevetoxins thread through sodium channels like pickpockets with slender wrists. Saxitoxin sits in the pore like a rock in a keyhole. Aerosolized by breaking waves, a fog of irritation lifts off the water and strolls the boardwalk. People cough and blame the breeze. The breeze shrugs and points at evolution. On that same shoreline long ago, a sea reptile would surface to clear its lungs and find its throat burning anyway. A pteranodon circling late might taste metal as the wind licked the bloom and carried the chemistry up. Beauty is not obligated to be harmless. There's theatre in the colour change alone. Take Noctiluca as a modern example, a plump, peach-coloured carnivore under daylight that can paint bays red when crowded, then erupt into electric blue with the slightest insult at night. Not even toxic, usually. It kills by crowding and by stealing oxygen. Death by bureaucracy. Linguladinium polyedra. Pyrocystis fusiformis. Names you don't need to remember to admire the routine. Migrate upward by dusk. Concentrate their light gear at the membrane. Set the sensitivity. Wait for turbulence. During the day they sink a bit, tired stars putting themselves away. You can almost hear the clock in them ticking across eons. Prehistoric water had the same routine, up at dusk, down at noon, written by physics in the language of density and hunger. If you could hover at the chemocline during one of those ancient nights, the scene would be obscene in its clarity. Above, the sparkle of bioluminescent protest tracing every tailbeat. At the knife edge where oxygen thins to rumour, a pale milky veil where sulfide oxidizes to elemental sulphur, the ocean's cataract. Below, darkness that isn't empty but preoccupied. Sulfate reducers cooking H2S, iron, meeting that sulfide to form pyrite. Microcurrents etching invisible letters into the boundary. Every splash from above tosses a shower of blue down like 1,000 falling stars hitting a ceiling. You could read the night traffic of an entire lagoon by those sparks. The animals learn the rules, or they die by them. Schooling fish compressed to the point of absurdity, counting on geometry to keep the odds decent. A predator can't eat a sphere, but the tighter the school, the brighter the outline when it bends the surface into a glowing ribbon. Lanternfish and juvenile sharks cruise the edges because dinner advertises itself in Morse code. Copepods kick once, twice, stop kicking. They've hired too many billboards tonight. Even jellyfish, those indestructible landlords of low oxygen, trail faint comets when their bells disturb the glow. Golden drifters wearing borrowed halos while everything with a spine is weighed down by biochemistry and bad timing. Day returns and the sea looks like tea gone old. The surf hisses the same, but the soundtrack is wrong. Fewer pops from snapping shrimp, fewer slaps from mullet, more stillness where the shallows should gossip. On the mudflats, clams close early and stay shut. A reasonable position when the water above them vacillates between euphoric and unbreathable. The tide carries out a tidy ribbon of silver, juveniles that bet the lagoon would be fine one more night, and lays them on a bar where gulls consider the offer and decide correctly that free food sometimes burns. In some seasons, a keen nose would find that penny smell of iron and the match head of sulphur braided together. In others, nothing but the generic salt of a bad idea perfectly executed. The light tricks us because it feels like mercy. Children run through glowing shallows and squeal. Lovers write their initials with their hands. Poets get busy with the word starlit. All of it honest, none of it the whole story. That flash exists because the cell felt attacked. A fish trail glows because it disturbed a field of alarms. The brightest nights align with the densest crowds, and the densest crowds eat oxygen and cast shade and throw molecules that jam synapses. Night is a neon apology laid over a crime scene. Inside the cells, the clock keeps brutal time. At dusk, enzymes in the light organelles spool up production. Scintillons ride tiny conveyor belts to their posts. The whole cell becomes tripwire. Toward dawn, the organelles reel the gear back, luciferase gets degraded, luciferin tucked away, sensitivity ratcheted down. The threshold for triggering a flash rises with the sun until you'd have to hit the water with a hammer to get so much as a sulk. This is not romance, it's budgeting. Photons are expensive and even single cells understand thrift. Those rhythms are fossil-proof, they don't leave bones, but the laminae that record nighttime oxygen debt, the daily couplets in varved muds, the stacked seasons of breath and hold, are printed evidence that lives once tethered themselves to that clock and paid the price for it. Some nights, calm, heat-bled, glassy, you can watch predation happen as geometry. A young predator carves a curve that stays glowing for a breath, a signature you could frame. The school answers by folding like cloth, and every fold sketches blue. The edge of the lagoon, where the bloom is thinnest, stays dark. The interior, thick as velvet, looks like a spilled galaxy. It's easy to think the galaxy is an invitation. It isn't. It's a warning system, a side effect, a symptom, and a spectacle. When morning comes, the same water will host a meeting between sunlight and chemistry, and somebody's gills, and sunlight rarely loses. You can forgive ancient eyewitnesses, if there had been any, for blaming gods. The water lights under your touch and kills under your eye. It blesses a wave with stars and then feeds those stars to the deep for oxygen. But the bargain is secular, and it's made of parts you can name, measure and graph. Luciferase kinetics, dial migration, oxygen solubility, thermoclines, toxin congeners, respiration curves. The ocean doesn't do miracles here, it does leverage. At night it leverages your ore to hide the ledger. By day it presents the bill. So go ahead, drag your hand through the shallows of that remembered bay and watch the blue unfurl like silk. Feel the primitive tug that says the world is enchanted. Then look up at the sickle moon, listen to how quiet the fish are, and taste the metal in the air. The smallest rulers have written their sign across the night. In the morning they'll collect. The first thing that thrives when the water loses its breath isn't heroic. It's gelatin. Bells and ribbons, glassy sacks with mouths, colonial strings of light that hunt by architecture rather than speed. When oxygen drops, muscle becomes a luxury and bone a liability. But jelly is patient. Jelly can idle. Jelly can wait out the choke. It helps that the jellyfish are time travelers disguised as weather. They don't live on a straight line, they live in a loop. One version of them, Medusa, the classic umbrella with trailing lace, glides and feeds and makes more of itself the glamorous way. The other version, Polyps, small and stubborn, hides on pilings, shells, any hard scrap, and ignores the drama until the calendar says go. When the water warms or nutrients surge, those polyps flip into assembly mode, strobulating like factory belts, releasing stacks of baby Medusa, Ephyrae one after another, like coins. You clean a coastline of predators, still the currents, fatten the pantry, and a quiet crust of polyps becomes a weather event. Jelly bloom sounds gentle. It's a hiring spree. Ctenophores answer from a parallel universe. There are not jellies, technically, no stinging cells, thank you. But comb jellies run the same soft-bodied playbook with a different weapon. Coloblasts, tiny glue grenades on tentacles that snag whatever bumps them. Under a light, their ciliary rows diffract into rainbow ladders, a shimmering PR campaign for an animal that eats fish larvae like popcorn. In low oxygen layers where fish brains complain and turn around, ctenophores keep combing. Their metabolism runs on discount settings. They can be transparent and still win. Then come salps, the ocean's inflatable filtration line. Individually, they're clear barrels with a jet engine, pumping water through a mucus net that sieves out meals so small most predators don't bother. Together, they form chains, zooids cloned into living trains, that can clear a water column into clarity. The punchline is speed. What goes in as suspended life comes out as dense pellets that sink like pebbles. A salp bloom is a carbon elevator. It starves the surface and feeds the deep in fast forward, redirecting dinner from fish to bacteria with a kind of cheerful efficiency. Someone will call this a jelly pump or jelly shunt in a paper. You can call it a regime change. Soft-bodied winners don't keep good fossils, which is convenient for our pride. We like our past to have skeletons, but the jelly plan, slow pulse, low demand, slots perfectly into oceans wounded by heat and nutrients. Hypoxia is the bouncer. Fish and crustaceans cough and leave. Jellies and ctenophores slide in unbothered. Their tissues are mostly water. Their oxygen bills are tiny. They can shrink when starving and regrow when fed, like living budgets. They don't rust in low oxygen corners, they decorate them. The food web doesn't collapse under this, it liquefies. Energy stop marching neatly from a phytoplankton to zooplankton to fish to bigger fish. It starts whirling in loops, microbes eating dissolved organic carbon, microzooplankton eating microbes, jellies intercepting everything that moves and turning it into slime, pellets, and more jellies. Viral shrapnel, the viral shunt, bursts cells back into soup. Bacteria build new bodies out of that soup. Small grazers eat those bacteria. Jellies vacuum the grazers. A reef or shelf that once converted sunlight into muscle and bone now converts it into mucus and rain. Sponges appreciate this new economy. They are not boneless in the jelly way. Many make tiny glass needles for reinforcement. But their strategy is equally ruthless. Pump, pump, pump. On stressed reefs, the coral landlords falter and pale. Sponges expand their mortgage. The sponge loop recycles dissolved organic carbon, normally a dead end for fish, into particulate crumbs that microbes and detritivores can grab. Useful, yes, but in a way that entrenches the microbial state. The architecture shifts from city to compost pile, and compost piles are very good at staying compost. Back near the surface, the gelatinous guild scales up its tricks. Siphonophores, cousins of jellies but structured like starships, assemble colonies that can be longer than your house is useful. Each unit in the chain has a job: swimming, stinging, feeding, reproduction. Together they fish with curtains of tentacles that feel the current as a loom. In low oxygen water, that loom drapes across the path that larvae and small fish must take to breathe. A siphonophore doesn't chase, it waits. Efficiency disguised as laziness. A dead zone doesn't mean dead. It means certain things die while others write the rules. Jellyfish don't merely survive hypoxia, they weaponize it. They slip into the oxygen minimum zone like it's a private lounge, hang at the boundary where gills wheeze and turn back, and eat whatever scrapes past that line. Their stings are slow paperwork. Nematocysts unfurl, inject, some barely itch, others write paralysis in cursive, and the prey folds like laundry. Meanwhile, their own tissues carry fewer mitochondria per ambition. Less machinery, fewer bills. They're built for quiet. Prehistoric waters played this tune in deeper keys. After the big collapses, grazers of the seafloor, the animals that churned and breathed sediment, were thin to rumour. Microbial mats draped the bottom like sticky rugs. Above, stratified lenses of warm, fresh water sat over salt like a lid. In that sandwich, gelatinous drifters were not just tolerated, they were rewarded. A polyp clinging to a shell shard could sit out a decade of bad chemistry and then release a brigade. The first summer, the river sent a fat pulse of phosphorus. ctenophores combed the thin oxygen edge just above the sulfidic veil, mouths perpetually open, tentacles sticky as a lie. Salp chains braided the surface into empty, polished glass. Whatever bones still tried to grow would have noticed the loneliness. There's a ruined elegance to the way jellyfish manage predators, mostly by being not worth the trouble. Gelatinous tissue is low in calories. Spines and beaks glance off it like etiquette. Some turtles and a few specialised fish make a point of eating them, but in stressed seas the specialists are the first to go. What remains is a buffet that almost no one wants, and yet no one can stop making. Jellies get away with it because they trade quality for quantity, and then keep the operation lean. They also farm bacteria by accident. Jellyfish exude mucus, yards of it when stressed, and bacteria colonise this banquet immediately, chewing oxygen in little tornadoes of metabolism. The slime snags particles, becomes marine snow, adds to the falling rain that feeds anoxia below. You can stand on a jetty and watch this in miniature. Brown strings slinking under the surface like someone unspooled a dirty ribbon. In a lagoon, those ribbons braid. In a shelf sea they become weather. When fish recruitment fails in a bloom year, jellyfish don't send regrets. Many jellies eat eggs and larvae with the indiscriminate appetite of a paper shredder. A single moon jelly pulsing through a hatchery's worth of anchovy larvae is a budget cut enacted in minutes. Ctenophores mouth entire clouds of copepods and nauplii, packaging the future into bellies that will in turn become future for bacteria. The longer the hypoxia lingers, the more the next generation of gill breathers is pushed into the design margins. There's grandeur, if you can stomach it, in the scale of the gelatinous sink. When a bloom tips over, jelly carcasses fall in curtains, jelly falls, delivering huge water-rich, protein-poor packages to the bottom. Scavengers mob them in the oxygenated patches, bacteria dismantle them in the rest. A single jelly fall feeds a dark community for days. A season of jelly falls turns a basin into a festival of rot that seals its own fate. More oxygen consumed, more sulfide minted, more black written into the layers. Reef by reef, shelf by shelf, the personality of the ocean tilts. Where hard-bodied grazers once rasped algae off coral and kept neighbourhoods clean, blooms shade the shallows and tilt grazer diets towards slime. Fish that hunted by sprinting lose the hallway to run in. The soundscape dulls, fewer crackles, more hush. Bones are movements captured in calcium, jelly is movement pretending it doesn't care. None of this requires malice or novelty, it just exploits ratios. Warm water holds less oxygen, still water mixes less. More nutrients mean more biomass means more respiration at night and at depth. Turn the knobs in that direction and the soft-bodied plan becomes optimal. The best part, from jellyfish's point of view, is that the plan is portable. It works in fjords with sills that trap stale water, in inland seas with shallow, wind-proof geometries, in epicontinental shelves during greenhouse stands, in coastal lagoons that catch every gift a river throws. It worked long before we wrote it down. It works now when we pretend we're surprised. There are counterpunches, seasonal and stochastic. Storms barrel in and rip the lid off. Cold snaps stall strobilation. Upwelling returns with a vengeance and paints the shelf in diatoms that clog jelly nets and feed fish instead. A lucky year gives young gill breathers enough room to become predators again. But feasts favour habit, and habit favours those who can wait cheaply. Jellyfish are patients with a heartbeat. Spend a night on a pier in a year like this, in any era that behaves, and you'll see the doctrine making itself plain. The water flares with blue at your step, the air tastes faintly of metal. The pilings are slick with tiny floral-looking polyps you'd step over if you didn't know better. Out beyond the lights, something long and colonial draws a luminous line and erases it in the same breath. A plastic bottle drifts by with a post-it stuck to it in biology's handwriting. We accept jelly or cash. In the morning, the net comes up heavy and wrong. Pounds of bell and filament that slide like ghosts through mesh made for scales. And the deck crew, prehistoric or modern, curses in the same rhythm. Winners with no bones never needed your applause. They needed your stillness, your warmth, the extra phosphorus you thought the river could carry without comment. They needed a few summer nights in a row when oxygen had somewhere else to be. They took the gig. They kept it simple. Pulse, trap, glue, sink, repeat. And while the sea writes another black line for the archive, a polyp the size of a hangnail resets its clock and waits for the next cue. The mirror isn't flattering because it's honest. Warmth on the surface, stillness in the column, a pantry clogged with nutrients. Prehistoric oceans used that recipe to turn water into slow poison. We've kept the recipe and added a mixer. The difference now is tempo. Where volcanoes and shifting continents set the metronome in deep time, we've cranked the BPM with exhaust pipes, fertilizer, concrete, and the very efficient human habit of moving fast and being surprised by the wake. Start with warmth. Greenhouse physics doesn't care if the CO2 comes from basalt floods 200 million years ago, or the Tuesday commute. Warm surface water floats higher on the density ladder, and the ladder becomes a wall. Wind finds less grip. Storms still punch, but the calm between them grows slicker, the thermocline sharper, the oxygen below stingier. You can watch it on a graph. Summer surface temperatures notch up. Deep oxygen inches down like a clock losing minutes it'll never regain. The ocean remembers cooler centuries the way your lungs remember young hills. Memory helps exactly none. Then feeding. Rivers are delivery trucks that don't ask questions. We ask corn and grass and cotton and cities to grow fast, then treat their leftovers like gossip, let the rain carry it somewhere else. Phosphorus and nitrogen slide down gutters through treatment plants not designed for this party, into estuaries that were built for tides and marshes, not for lawn chemistry. Dams flatten river pulses into long syllables. Wetlands, the ocean's kidneys, are paved or pinned behind levees. The result is a coastal lens so buoyant it floats above the sea, a warm freshwater sheet that says to the wind, "Stay outside," while whispering to phytoplankton, "Please, overachieve." Add geometry, fjords with sills that hold their breath, lagoons cupped like hands that never spill, drowned river valleys that became suburbs and marinas, epicontinental shelves in deep time, suburban harbours now. The shape of a basin is a vote about whether water will mix. Many of our favourites vote no. The map looks innocent. A crescent bay, a scenic estuary, a channel that narrows just so. The physics under that postcard is a lock. You want to feel clever? We can see blooms from space now. Satellites sketch chlorophyll swirls in greens and browns, measure fluorescence like a lie detector for photosynthesis, spot the sheen where a river's plume fans out into the sea. Gliders crawl the water column and report back, temperature here, oxygen there, a mixed layer the depth of a hallway. Boys sleep with one eye open, telegraphing pH and nitrates like gossiping aunts. We know the choreography better than any trilobite ever did, and still the dancers get to the finale before we do. The chemistry, faithful and boring and cruel, repeats its lines. Daytime oxygen flirts with supersaturation right at the top, a slick of breath where sunlight made sugar faster than anything could spend it. Night drops the ledger into red. Dead cells fall. Microbes clock in and take their cut, phase shifting the water from oxic to hypoxic to anoxic on cue. At the mud-water boundary, iron lets go of phosphate in the absence of oxygen. Hello. Internal loading, the pantry refilling itself from the basement, and the next bloom grows partly on yesterday's sins. It's an elegant loop with terrible taste. We've taught predators new manners by accident. close a river mouth with a jetty, and fish congregate in the oxygenated seam where surf churns. Train a city's lights on the surface and anchovies stack in slick pools like punctuation. Meanwhile, the red tide arrives like an office memo. Shellfish lapse from delicacy to device. Bioaccumulators with the courtesy to wait on a rock while we decide whether to eat them. Regulators post warnings, restaurants change the menu font to soothe the vibe, the molecule doesn't care, saxitoxin will lock a sodium channel in a prince or a peasant, a gull or a gourmand. Brevetoxin will prop it open whether you read the bulletin or not. Domoic acid will use the hippocampus like a throttle. The modernity here is only the signage. Tourism has a sense of humour about the night. Bioluminescence turns a bay into a private planetarium. We sell kayak tours beside advisories that say, please don't inhale too much of the air if the wind is wrong. Phones record neon wakes while just offshore, a line of baitfish keeps its distance like a rumour avoiding confirmation. Social media glows, the gills keep their opinions, the lights are lovely, the ledger is not. Inland, the mirror insists on extending itself. Shallow lakes rimmed by farms, reservoirs lined with houses, summer heat stirring cyanobacteria into ropes of green and brown silk. The vocabulary shifts from tide to scum, from brevetoxin to microcystin, but the physics rhymes. Warm lid, overfeeding, stillness. A dog swims, a child splashes, a sign says don't. Winds change and the bloom marches along a shore like a slow parade with a terrible brass section. We hold our noses and call it a seasonal nuisance. It is also, if you're counting, an old story correcting for pronouns, not ocean water. We tell ourselves we can engineer our way out. Sometimes we do. Oxygen bubblers lace a deep basin with air like champagne. Alum binds phosphorus and pins it. Wetlands get restored at the edge of a city like a spa day for an estuary. These work. Then a heatwave sits down and refuses to leave. A river overtops its banks and writes new channels through fields. A drought concentrates the pantry in smaller volumes. Fixes are local. Drivers are continental. You can't alum a summer. And yet there are reprieves. A storm threads a fjord like a needle, punches the sill with cold oxygen-rich water, rinses the bottom clean of sulfide for a season. A winter arrives with wind that won't stop harassing the surface, and the spring bloom is diatoms instead of drama queens. The food chain remembers how to pass energy up the ladder instead of looping it in microbial circles. A lucky year lets fish get through their larval bottleneck, and the next summer is swarmed by bodies that convert sunlight into speed and teeth again. The ocean doesn't want a regime shift any more than a forest wants a crown fire. It just wants the math to be reasonable. A funny thing about our age, we keep receipts now. Cores from basins with 20th century lamination show black couplets that match droughts and heat waves on paper calendars, match fisheries logbooks, match newspaper notes about eye-irritating air on the pier. Satellites keep films of swirls we can replay like weather reports for ghosts. We can prove that yesterday's tendency is today's habit. The mirror isn't asking you to believe, it's asking you to look. And the cast list behaves with absurd loyalty to type. Jellyfish are unbothered landlords, renting low-oxygen corners on monthly terms. Ctenophores comb through dusk like vacuum cleaners that hum lullabies. Salp chains calibrate the surface, clearing it and snowing it into depth, brightening blue water while starving fish of the right size crumbs. Sponges expand where corals fail and turn dissolved leftovers into particulate paychecks for microbes. The future doesn't vanish, it gelatinizes. Some nights, even the air is complicit. A swell breaks and atomizes a fraction of the bloom into sea salt aerosols, the ocean's perfume fume laced with mischief. People on the promenade cough and rub their eyes. Manatees breathing at the surface get the same lesson with fewer options. Seabirds cut their circles shorter. The interface between worlds has always leaked. We are simply here to notice it. We like to frame this as a battle. The heroic oyster reef, the evil bloom, the noble eelgrass, the villainous nutrient. But the physics isn't listening. Oysters don't moralize. They filter until they're full or dead. Eelgrass will return if the light does. The bloom isn't plotting, it's dividing. Good and bad are our decorations on a system that responds to ratios. If the ratios go back, so will the drama. If they don't, the ocean will keep choosing winners that can run on thin air and indifference. Someone will say, fine, then what? The answer is boring on purpose. Slow the heat. Tuck nutrients back into soils and wetlands before they turn into headlines. Give rivers their meanders and floodplains back so a storm can be a storm without being a delivery service. Stop treating the sea like a convenient edit suite for mistakes made uphill. These are not romantic solutions, they are unglamorous repairs to plumbing and physics. Prehistoric oceans had the decency of slow disasters. We have the indecency of speed. Decency is available if inconvenient. Meanwhile, the smallest rulers have impeccable patience. Cyst banks sleep in mud like vaults. Mixotraphs practice their 2 meals a day plan regardless of policy. Dinoflagellates keep their night clocks tuned. Diatoms keep their glassware polished. Cyanobacteria keep their nitrogen-fixing engines oiled the way a desert keeps dust ready for the first good wind. They are not waiting for us. They're waiting for conditions, which is a kinder way of saying they are waiting for our habits. You don't have to stand on a prehistoric shore to understand the intimacy of this. Stand on a modern pier on a windless August night. The water is a sheet. The lights of the marina smear themselves on the surface like melted gold. Somewhere out in the dark a school turns, and a line of cold blue handwriting appears and vanishes. You breathe and taste a faint coin tang on the air, the kind that makes the back of your tongue alert. You think about ladders and lids and the way oxygen moves like rumour through water. You imagine the mud below you deciding whether to hang on to its phosphorus for one more day, and you notice your pulse match the slow clap of the swell against the pilings. The mirror is not an accusation, it is a demonstration. The same choreography, the same props, the same steer, just a new lighting cue. And if you listen closely to that quiet water, you will hear nothing and everything. The world's oldest business plan clearing its throat.